Blood trailing from his wound, James Reeves collapsed before Clara Evenson as she wept over another death in a town abandoned by all but the desperate. The words he gasped through blood-flecked lips would change American medicine forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The sunset painted prosperity with hues of amber and gold, a cruel irony for a town that had long since forgotten what prosperity felt like. Dust devils swirled through deserted streets that once bustled with miners, merchants, and dreams of silver fortunes. Now, only ghosts remained, and Clara Evenson, who knelt sobbing on the boardwalk outside what had once been Doc Miller's office. Blood trailed from beneath her fingernails, staining the front of her once pristine apron. The child had come too early, breech and blue, and though Clara had performed every technique in her considerable arsenal, some battles could not be won. The mother followed shortly after, hemorrhaging that no amount of pressure or prayer could stop. Two more souls to haunt this dying town. Clara's shoulders shook with each sob. This marked the third failed birth in as many months. The mining accident last spring had taken most of the men. The company's abrupt departure had taken the rest, and the brutal winter had nearly finished the job. Most survivors had packed whatever they could carry and fled east. Only the desperately hopeful, the stubbornly faithful, or those too poor to leave remained. She was the last midwife for 50 miles. The last person with any medical training at all since Doc Miller had packed his bags 3 weeks prior, pressing his medical texts into her hands with a hurried explanation about opportunities in California. "You're better with mothers anyway, Clara," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "You'll manage fine." She hadn't managed fine. She'd failed. Failed little Elizabeth Carson, who would never draw breath. Failed poor Sarah, who had placed such trust in Clara's hands. Failed the dozen or so families who still clung to prosperity like moss to a dying tree. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered through her grief. Visitors were rare these days, usually just desperate travelers or those too lost to know that prosperity had nothing left to offer. Clara didn't bother to rise or wipe her tears. Let whoever it was see her grief. Let them understand what this godforsaken place had become. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. She heard the creak of saddle leather, the soft thud of boots hitting dirt, then uneven footsteps approaching the boardwalk. Still, Clara didn't look up, not until a shadow fell across her and a rough voice, tight with pain, broke the silence. "Ma'am? You the doctor here?" Clara raised her head slowly, vision blurred by tears. The man before her was tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette severe against the dying light. As her eyes focused, details emerged. Expensive but trail-worn clothes, a gun belt with pearl-handled revolvers, and most notably, a bloodied shirt wrapped around his midsection, crimson spreading beneath his half-buttoned coat. "Doctor's gone," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Everybody's gone." The stranger swayed slightly, one hand bracing against the post supporting the boardwalk awning. "You look like you might know something about fixin' people," he observed, nodding toward her blood-stained hands. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "I'm a midwife, or I was. Doesn't seem to be much call for bringing babies into the world when the world's falling apart." She wiped her cheeks with the back of her wrist, smearing tears and blood in equal measure. "I just lost a mother and child. So if you're looking for someone to save your life, mister, you've come to the wrong place." The man's eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened face, took in the blood on her clothes, the grief etched into her features. Something unreadable crossed his expression. "Maybe we're both in the wrong place then," he said, his voice softening. "But I don't think I'll make it to the right one without some help." As if to emphasize his point, his knees buckled. Clara moved without thinking, years of catching newborns having honed her reflexes. She caught his arm, staggering under his weight as he leaned heavily against her. "Bullet?" she asked, professional instinct momentarily overriding her despair. He nodded, jaw clenched. "Went clean through, I think. But it's been bleeding something fierce for miles." "How many men are after you?" Clara asked, suddenly alert to the danger this stranger might have brought to her doorstep. A grimace that might have been attempting to be a smile crossed his face. "Don't worry, ma'am. They think I'm dead. Left me for the buzzards about 10 miles south of here. And yet here you are." "I'm notoriously hard to kill," he said, then winced as a fresh wave of pain hit him, though this time might prove the exception. Clara hesitated. Common sense told her to send him away. She was no doctor, and harboring what was clearly an outlaw could only bring more trouble to a town already drowning in it. But the midwife in her, the healer, couldn't turn away someone in need, not when she'd just failed so terribly at saving a life. "I have supplies inside," she said finally. "I can clean it, stitch it if needed, but I'm not promising anything." Relief washed over his features. "That's more than I had 5 minutes ago, ma'am." With effort, Clara helped him through the door of what had once been Doc Miller's office and was now her makeshift clinic and home. The single room was sparse but clean. A metal examination table, shelves of bottles and instruments, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall where Clara slept. A pot-bellied stove in the corner provided the only heat. "On the table," she directed, helping him ease his tall frame onto the cold metal. "And it's Clara Evanson. No need for ma'am when you're bleeding all over my floor." He grimaced as he settled back. "James Reeves, though most folks just call me Reeves." Clara moved to the wash basin, scrubbing Sarah Carson's blood from her hands before reaching for fresh water and soap. "Well, Mr. Reeves, I need you to remove your coat and shirt so I can see what I'm dealing with." As he struggled with the buttons, Clara gathered her supplies: carbolic acid, clean bandages, needle and catgut. She'd assisted Doc Miller with bullet wounds before, though she'd never treated one alone. But the principles were the same as with torn birth tissue: clean, stop the bleeding, close what could be closed, and pray infection didn't set in. Reeves had managed to shrug out of his coat, but his hands trembled too badly to work the buttons of his shirt. Without comment, Clara stepped forward and finished the job for him, carefully peeling the blood-soaked fabric away from the wound. The bullet had indeed passed through, entering just above his right hip and exiting through his back, missing vital organs but leaving torn flesh in its wake. "You're lucky," she said, inspecting the wound with clinical detachment. "Another inch to the left and we wouldn't be having this conversation." "I've been hearing that my whole life," he replied, his voice strained. "My mother used to say I was born with the devil's own luck." Clara soaked a cloth in carbolic solution. "This will hurt." "I reckon I can handle it." She pressed the cloth to the wound, and to his credit, Reeves barely flinched. His knuckles whitened where he gripped the edge of the table, but no sound escaped him. Clara worked efficiently, cleaning both entry and exit wounds before preparing her needle. "So," she said as she threaded the catgut, partly to distract him and partly because curiosity was getting the better of her. "Who shot you, Mr. Reeves?" "Man who didn't appreciate how I played cards." His eyes followed her movements with surprising lucidity for someone who'd lost as much blood as he had. "Though if you'd ask him, he'd say it was because I killed his brother." Clara's hand stilled. "Did you?" Reeves held her gaze, unflinching. "Yes, 3 years ago. Self-defense, though that particular detail didn't seem to matter much to him." Clara resumed her work, making the first stitch with practiced precision. "And what brings you to prosperity? Besides getting shot, that is." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Heard there was a doctor here. Town's not exactly on any maps these days. You've got old information. Prosperity's been dying since the Silver Creek mine collapsed last spring. Killed 27 men in the town's future in one blast. Clara tied off the first stitch and began another. Most everyone with sense has already left. Yet you're still here, he observed. Clara's movements faltered. Someone has to deliver the babies, or try to at least. Her throat tightened, Sarah Carson's face swimming before her eyes again. Reeves watched her quietly for a moment. The woman and child you lost, was it quick? The question surprised her. It wasn't what people usually asked. No, she admitted. It was long and terrible, for both of them. He nodded solemnly. My mother was a midwife back in Missouri. Lost a mother once. Couldn't look anyone in the eye for weeks after. Said it was like carrying someone else's ghost. Clara's eyes snapped to his, startled by the accuracy of the description. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was, he agreed, a shadow crossing his features. Wiser than her son, certainly. As Clara continued stitching, a strange companionship settled between them. Two wounded souls in an abandoned town, each carrying their own ghosts. Outside, night was falling in earnest, the last crimson streaks of sunset giving way to deep blue. She lit a lamp, the warm glow softening the harsh lines of Reeves's face, revealing a man perhaps in his mid-30s, handsome in a weathered way, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much. Almost done, she said, tying off the final stitch on the exit wound. You'll need to rest. Let the body heal itself now. Don't suppose there's a hotel still operating in this ghost town? Clara shook her head. Nothing, but you can stay here tonight. Take the bed. I'll use the chair. I won't put a lady out of her bed, he protested. You're not. I haven't slept in it since... She stopped herself. I prefer the chair lately. Understanding flickered in his eyes. He didn't press. Clara finished bandaging his wounds, then helped him to the narrow bed where he settled with a barely suppressed groan. She placed a tin cup of water and a small brown bottle on the crate that served as a bedside table. Laudanum, she explained. For the pain. Just a few drops. Thank you, Miss Evanson, he said, his voice already growing heavy with exhaustion. I'm in your debt. Clara settled into her chair by the stove, watching as his breathing gradually deepened. Outside, the wind whispered through the abandoned streets of Prosperity, carrying dust and broken promises. She wondered what new promises tomorrow would bring, and whether they too would turn to dust. She didn't know then that the arrival of James Reeves, gunslinger, outlaw, and son of a Missouri midwife, would change everything. Didn't know that the promise he would make her in the cold light of dawn would not only save Prosperity, but write both their names into history. Clara woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the pale blue light of dawn filtering through the clinic's grimy windows. She'd fallen asleep in the chair, her neck stiff, and her mind still tangled in dreams of crying infants she couldn't reach. The events of yesterday crashed back, Sarah Carson's death, the stranger with the bullet wound, and she turned quickly toward the bed. It was empty, the blanket folded neatly at the foot. Alarm shot through her as she rose, scanning the small room. Had he left during the night, stolen her meager supplies and disappeared? But before panic could fully take hold, the door opened, and James Reeves stepped inside, moving gingerly but steadier than he had any right to be. Morning, he said, setting a small bundle on the table. Found some eggs in an abandoned coop behind the mercantile. Figured you might be hungry. Clara stared at him, bewildered. You should be resting. Never was good at staying put. He unwrapped 6 speckled eggs from a cloth. Got a fire going in the stove already. Hope you don't mind. She approached cautiously, eyeing his bandaged side for signs of fresh bleeding. You'll tear your stitches. Wouldn't be the first time. He cracked an egg into a small iron pan he must have found in her meager kitchen supplies. Sit. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. It was true. Between attending to the few remaining townspeople and her own grief, food had become an afterthought. Clara sank into a chair, watching as this strange man, this gunslinger who by all rights should be bedridden, moved about her kitchen with surprising competence. "Where'd you learn to cook?" she asked. "Trail teaches a man plenty." He flipped the eggs with practiced ease. "That, and I spent 6 months as a chuck wagon cook when I was 17. Got fired when the cattle boss caught me teaching his daughter to shoot." Despite herself, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Reeves." "Just Reeves is fine." He slid a plate of eggs before her. "And you haven't seen anything yet." They ate in silence for a few minutes, Clara suddenly ravenous. When she'd cleaned her plate, she studied him more carefully in the morning light. The pallor of blood loss still marked his features, but his eyes were clear and alert, taking in every detail of her small living space. "Your wound needs checking," she said finally, professional concern reasserting itself. He nodded, setting aside his plate and unbuttoning his shirt without argument. Clara unwrapped the bandages, pleasantly surprised to find the stitched wounds showing no signs of infection, clean and already beginning to heal. "You've got the constitution of a mule," she muttered, applying fresh carbolic solution. "Been told worse," he replied with a half-smile that transformed his hard features into something almost boyish. As she worked, Clara became increasingly aware of him watching her, his gaze thoughtful rather than intrusive. "What happened here?" he asked finally. "To prosperity, I mean. Mining towns don't just die overnight." Clara's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. It wasn't overnight, it was slow, then fast, like watching someone drown. She secured a fresh bandage before continuing. The Silver Creek mine was everything. When it collapsed, the company just left, packed up their offices and disappeared. No compensation for the widows, no attempt to recover the bodies still trapped below. And the law allowed that? A bitter laugh escaped her. What law? Sheriff took the company's money and left with them. Besides, prosperity's just a pinprick on a map that's already outdated. Reeves nodded slowly. "How many people are left?" "Maybe 30, mostly women and children. A few old-timers too stubborn to leave." She gathered the soiled bandages. "The Carson family, the ones I lost yesterday, they were planning to leave next week. Had family in Ohio willing to take them in." "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and something in his tone made her believe he truly was. Clara turned away, busying herself with her supplies to hide the sudden moisture in her eyes. "It doesn't matter now. Soon there won't be anything left of prosperity but dust and memories. Unless someone gives people a reason to stay. Or come back." She turned to face him, skepticism evident. "And what reason would that be, Mr. Reeves? The silver's gone. The company's gone. There's nothing left to build on." "There's always something," he said, buttoning his shirt with careful movements. "Sometimes it just takes fresh eyes to see it." Clara shook her head. "You sound like a traveling salesman peddling empty promises." "No, ma'am," he replied, his expression suddenly serious. "I don't make promises I can't keep." Something in his tone made her pause. "And what promises do you keep, James Reeves?" He stood, moving to the window to gaze out at the dusty street. For a long moment he was silent, and Clara wondered if he would answer at all. "I made a promise to my mother before she died," he said finally, his voice lower, rougher, "that I'd find a place to put down roots, that I'd use what she taught me to help others, not just myself." He turned back to face her. "Been running from that promise for 15 years. Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. A shadow crossed his face. Because staying in one place means facing yourself, means building something that can be taken away. His hand moved unconsciously to the gun at his hip. Easier to keep moving, to be nobody and nothing to anyone. Clara recognized the pain behind his words. It mirrored her own. She too had come to prosperity running from something. A broken engagement in Boston. A father who'd made it clear that a daughter with medical aspirations was no daughter of his. She'd arrived 5 years ago determined to prove herself, to build something meaningful. Now all her efforts were crumbling around her. "So why stop running now?" she asked. Reeves met her gaze steadily. Maybe getting shot puts things in perspective. Or maybe... He hesitated, then gestured toward her blood-stained apron, still hanging on a peg from yesterday. "Maybe seeing someone else who's lost their way reminds me of my own." Clara felt exposed, as if he'd peered directly into her soul. "I haven't lost my way," she protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No?" His blue eyes were too perceptive. "Then why are you the only one left who could leave? The only one with skills valuable anywhere else?" She had no answer for that. It was a question she'd asked herself during countless sleepless nights as prosperity slowly emptied around her. A knock at the door saved her from responding. Clara opened it to find Widow Barnes, one of the few remaining townspeople, wringing her hands anxiously. "It's Billy," the older woman said without preamble. "His cough's worse and he's burning up something fierce. I didn't know where else to turn." Clara grabbed her medical bag immediately. "I'll come right away." She glanced back at Reeves. "Rest. Don't tear those stitches. I'll be back to check on you later." He nodded, but something in his expression suggested he had no intention of simply waiting around. As she followed Widow Barnes down the dusty street, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that James Reeves was a man with a plan forming, one that somehow involved her and this dying town. What she couldn't possibly know was that by sunset, he would make her a proposal so outrageous, so impossible, and yet so perfect, that it would change not just prosperity's fate, but the very course of history in the American West. Billy Barnes was 8 years old, rail-thin and burning with fever when Clara arrived at the cramped one-room cabin his mother had managed to keep after most other properties had been reclaimed by the mining company. The boy's breathing came in labored wheezes, each inhalation a struggle that lifted his narrow chest and hollowed his cheeks. "How long has he been like this?" Clara asked, pressing her palm to his forehead. Widow Barnes twisted her apron between gnarled fingers. "The cough started last week, but the fever only came on yesterday. I tried willow bark tea, but he couldn't keep it down." Clara nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern. 3 other children had fallen ill with similar symptoms over the winter. 2 had recovered, 1 hadn't. She suspected pneumonia, the mine's parting gift to prosperity. Even closed, its poisonous legacy lingered in the lungs of those who'd breathed its dust. "I need hot water and clean cloths," she instructed, removing vials of tinctures from her bag. "And if you have any honeycomb left from last summer, that too." As the widow hurried to comply, Clara bent close to Billy, listening to the wet rattle in his chest. His eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever, but recognizing her. "Miss Clara," he whispered, "am I gonna die like Tommy did?" Clara's heart clenched. Tommy Wilkins had been Billy's best friend, lost to the same illness 3 months earlier. "No," she said firmly, squeezing his small hand. "You're stronger than this sickness, Billy Barnes, and I'm not letting it take you. You understand me?" A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Yes'm." For the next 2 hours, Clara worked methodically, breaking his fever with cool compresses, easing his breathing with steam infused with eucalyptus oil she'd been hoarding for emergencies, mixing tinctures of echinacea and golden seal to fight the infection. Throughout her ministrations, she spoke to him quietly, telling stories of the world beyond prosperity, places she'd read about but never seen, the ocean with its endless waves, cities with buildings taller than trees, lands where snow never fell. "When I get better," Billy whispered during a lucid moment, "can we leave here? Ma says there's nothing left for us." Clara smoothed his damp hair back from his forehead. "Your ma's a smart woman," she said softly. "But sometimes home isn't about what's left, it's about what can be built anew." The words surprised her even as they left her mouth. Was that truly what she believed, or just what she needed to believe to justify her own stubborn refusal to leave? By midday, Billy's fever had broken, and he'd fallen into a restful sleep. Clara left Widow Barnes with detailed instructions and promises to return that evening, then stepped back into the harsh sunlight of a day already half gone. The town looked different somehow, or perhaps she was seeing it differently. Where yesterday she had seen only decay and abandonment, today she noticed details that had escaped her. The resilient patches of wildflowers pushing through cracks in the boardwalk, the solidly built structures that had weathered harsh seasons, the distant mountains cradling the valley like protective hands. The boy going to make it? The voice startled her. James Reeves leaned against the hitching post outside the Barnes cabin, looking far too alert and mobile for a man with a bullet wound less than a day old. "He should," she replied, studying him with professional concern. "You, on the other hand, are risking reopening that wound. I thought I told you to rest." "Rested plenty." He fell into step beside her as she headed back toward the clinic. "Spent the morning getting the lay of the land." Clara gave him a sidelong glance. "There's not much to see." "I disagree." Something in his tone made her slow her pace. "This town has good bones, Clara. Solid foundation. The buildings were well constructed, unlike most mining boom towns where everything was slapped together overnight." "That's because prosperity wasn't built overnight," she explained. "Silver Creek was a steady producer for nearly 30 years before the collapse. People thought it would last forever. The stream that runs behind the town, does it flow year-round?" The question seemed odd, but she nodded. "Even in the driest summers." "Why?" Instead of answering, he pointed toward the distant hills. "That meadowland to the north, who owns it now?" "Nobody, I suppose. It was company land, but they abandoned their claim when they left." A suspicion began forming in her mind. "Mr. Reeves, what exactly are you getting at?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The midday sun caught in his eyes, turning them the color of a summer sky. "I'm getting at possibilities, Miss Evanson. Possibilities this town has that nobody's seeing." "Such as?" "Such as good water, available land, and solid infrastructure going to waste." His gaze swept the empty street. Prosperity died because it was a one-purpose town. When the silver went, so did the reason to exist. "But a town doesn't need silver to prosper." Clara frowned. "These people were miners, Mr. Reeves. What would they do without a mine? Farm, ranch, trade." He gestured expansively. "This valley sits at a natural crossroads. The new territorial road they're building to connect the railroad to Fort Laramie will pass within 5 miles of here." This was news to Clara. "How do you know that?" A smile touched his lips. "I pay attention to what's happening in the territories. Information is valuable currency in my line of work." "Your line of work being what exactly?" Clara challenged. "Card playing, gunfighting, getting shot and left for dead?" He didn't take offense, just chuckled softly. "Fair questions. Let's just say I've worn many hats, some more respectable than others." They had reached the clinic, but Clara didn't go inside. Something about Reeves's enthusiasm had kindled a reluctant spark of interest. Even if what you say is true about the road, it doesn't change the fact that most people have already left. A crossroads needs people to make it valuable. People will come if there's something to come to. He leaned against the porch post, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wound. What if prosperity could be reborn as something new? Not a mining town, but a way station. A place for travelers to rest, for traders to exchange goods, for settlers to find community. Clara stared at him, wondering if perhaps the bullet wound had affected his mind. And how exactly would this miraculous transformation occur? The remaining townspeople can barely feed themselves, let alone finance some grand revitalization. "It wouldn't take as much as you think," he said, his voice taking on a persuasive quality that made Clara understand how he might excel at poker. "The foundations are already here. The buildings, the water access. What's needed is vision, organization, and a small amount of capital to get things moving. And let me guess, you just happen to have this capital?" Clara's skepticism was evident. Reeves met her gaze steadily. "As a matter of fact, I do." Before she could respond, a commotion down the street caught their attention. 3 riders were approaching at a trot, raising dust from the unpaved road. Even from a distance, Clara could tell they weren't locals returning. These men sat their horses with the easy confidence of those who lived in the saddle. Reeves straightened immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun before he caught himself. Something in his posture changed, the relaxed conversationalist vanishing, replaced by a man accustomed to danger. "Friends of yours?" Clara asked quietly, noting his reaction. "Doubtful." His voice had dropped to a near whisper. "Get inside, Clara." "This is my town, please." The urgency in his tone stopped her protest. "These aren't men you want to meet." Clara hesitated, then nodded once and stepped through the clinic door. But she didn't close it completely, leaving it open just enough to observe the approaching riders. Through the crack, she watched as Reeves adopted a casual stance, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. The riders slowed as they neared, and Clara felt a chill run through her as she recognized the lead man's face from wanted posters that had circulated months ago. Malcolm Wade, notorious gang leader, wanted for robbery and murder across 3 territories. And he was looking at James Reeves like he'd just found something precious he'd lost. Clara's fingers tightened on the doorframe as she watched the 3 riders halt before the clinic. Malcolm Wade sat astride a magnificent black stallion, flanked by 2 hard-faced men whose eyes ceaselessly scanned their surroundings. All 3 were heavily armed with rifles and saddle scabbards and revolvers prominently displayed. "Well, I'll be damned," Wade drawled, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "James Reeves in the flesh, and here we were told you'd gone to meet your maker." "Sorry to disappoint," Reeves replied, his tone casual but his posture alert. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." Wade chuckled, though no humor reached his cold eyes. "Greatly exaggerated or deliberately fabricated? Carson was mighty convinced he'd left you bleeding out in the dirt." "Carson always was a poor judge of many things," Reeves said, "including when a man is actually dead." From her hidden vantage point, Clara studied Wade more carefully. Unlike his rough-looking companions, he was impeccably dressed in a black coat and vest, with a crisp white shirt and polished boots. His silver-streaked hair and neatly trimmed beard gave him the appearance of a prosperous businessman rather than an outlaw. Only his eyes betrayed his true nature, pale and calculating, assessing Reeves like a predator sizing up potential prey. "You've led us on quite a chase," Wade said, dismounting smoothly. His men remained on their horses, hands resting near their weapons. 3 territories, 6 months. Carson was so disappointed when he thought he'd killed you before I could have the pleasure. Reeves stood his ground, seemingly relaxed despite the clear threat. "Touching that, you'd go to such trouble for me, Malcolm. I'm flattered. $10,000 isn't flattery, James. It's business." Wade stepped closer, his gaze flicking to the bloodstain visible on Reeves's shirt. Though it appears Carson did manage to leave his mark. "Flesh wound," Reeves said dismissively. "Hardly worth mentioning. And yet, here you are, hiding in a ghost town, being patched up by—" Wade's eyes shifted to the clinic door, and Clara instinctively drew back into the shadows. "Local talent, I presume?" Something dangerous flashed across Reeves' face. "I'm just passing through. No need to involve the few folks left here." "Always the gentleman," Wade said with mock admiration. "Even when you're stealing $50,000 from me." Clara stifled a gasp. $50,000 was an unimaginable sum, more money than most people in prosperity would see in several lifetimes combined. "You can't steal what's already stolen," Reeves countered, his voice hardening. "That money belonged to the Butterfield stage line and the passengers you robbed. I simply redistributed it." Wade's expression darkened. "After taking your cut, of course." "Professional courtesy," Reeves replied with a tight smile. The pieces began falling into place in Clara's mind. Reeves wasn't just some gunslinger. He was a thief who had stolen from another thief. The capital he'd spoken of investing in prosperity was blood money, twice stolen. "Where is it, James?" Wade asked, all pretense of friendliness evaporating. "Return what's mine, and perhaps I'll grant you a quicker death than I've been planning these past months." "It's not here," Reeves said flatly. "No?" Wade's eyebrows rose. "Then perhaps your new friends know where you've hidden it." He nodded toward the clinic. "The good doctor, perhaps? Or other townsfolk you've charmed with your silver tongue?" "They know nothing," Reeves said, his hand moving fractionally closer to his gun. "This is between us, Malcolm." "Everything's negotiable," Wade replied with a cold smile. He raised his voice slightly. "To whoever's listening from inside, my business is with Reeves, not you. But harboring him makes you my business too. Best to stay clear of a man like him. He leaves nothing but ruin in his wake." Clara shrank back from the door, heart pounding. Whatever James Reeves was, whatever he had done, he'd saved Billy Barnes with his knowledge of medicinal plants and shown genuine concern for Prosperity's fate. But $50,000 in stolen money, that changed everything. "I'll give you until sundown, James," Wade continued. "Return what you took, or I'll burn what remains of this pitiful town to the ground, starting with that clinic. I doubt these good people deserve to suffer for your sins." Reeves's expression remained impassive, but Clara could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "You won't find it by destroying Prosperity." "Perhaps not," Wade conceded. "But I'll certainly enjoy watching you squirm while innocents pay the price for your thievery." He swung back into his saddle with fluid grace. "Sundown, James. Don't test my patience further." With that, Wade and his men wheeled their horses around and rode back the way they had come, dust billowing in their wake. Only when they were well down the street did Reeves's shoulders relax slightly. He turned toward the clinic, his expression grim. Clara stepped back as he pushed the door open, her mind racing with conflicting emotions, anger, confusion, and a troubling sense of disappointment. The man who had spoken so convincingly about Prosperity's potential was a wanted criminal with blood on his hands and a gang of killers on his trail. "You heard," he said simply, closing the door behind him. "Enough," Clara replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "You brought this danger to our doorstep." Reeves didn't deny it. "I never intended to stay long enough for Wade to track me here. The bullet complicated things." "The money," Clara said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. "The capital you spoke of investing in Prosperity. It's stolen. It's complicated, he said, meeting her gaze directly. Then uncomplicate it, she demanded. Tell me why I shouldn't march straight to Wade and tell him whatever he wants to know, if it means saving what's left of this town. Something like pain flickered across Reeves's face. Because Wade is worse than whatever you think I am. Because he's killed women and children without hesitation. Because the money he's after has already been put to better use than he could ever imagine. What does that mean? Reeves sighed, running a hand through his hair. Wade robbed a Butterfield stage 6 months ago. 3 passengers died. A young mother, a school teacher, and an elderly man returning to his grandchildren. I was on Wade's crew then. Shame colored his voice. I didn't know he planned to kill everyone. When it happened, something broke in me. Clara's throat tightened. So you took the money and ran? I took the money and delivered most of it to the families of those who died, Reeves said quietly. Every penny I could track to a victim went back to their kin. The company's portion, their insured losses, I kept. That's the money Wade wants. And that's the money you plan to use here? To revitalize prosperity? Clara asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Some of it. I've been using it to start fresh, to try to balance the scales. His blue eyes held hers. I can't bring back those people Wade killed, but I can try to create something good from something terrible. Clara wanted to believe him. Despite everything, some instinct told her he was telling the truth, or at least a version of it, he believed. But that didn't change the immediate danger. Wade will return at sundown, she said, with or without the money. Reeves nodded grimly. Yes, but he won't find what he's looking for. He moved to the window, peering out at the deserted street. You should gather as many townspeople as you can and leave, now while there's still time. Leave, Clara echoed. This is our home. It's not safe anymore, he said, turning back to her. Not with Wade and his men coming back. They'll tear this place apart looking for that money, and they won't care who gets hurt in the process. Because of you, she said, the accusation hanging between them. He didn't flinch from it. Yes, because of me. All the more reason for me to face this alone. Clara studied him. This complex, contradictory man who had appeared wounded on her doorstep not 24 hours ago and somehow managed to overturn everything she thought she knew about herself and Prosperity's future. There's something you're not telling me, she said finally. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Many things, Miss Evanson, but none that would make your situation safer or your choices clearer. Before she could respond, the clinic door burst open. Widow Barnes stood there, her face flushed with exertion. Clara, come quick, she gasped. It's Billy. He's taken a turn. Can't hardly breathe at all now. Clara's personal concerns evaporated instantly at Widow Barnes's words. She grabbed her medical bag, already mentally cataloging what additional supplies she might need. How long has he been struggling? Just started about 10 minutes ago, the widow replied, wringing her hands. 1 minute he was sleeping peaceful-like, the next he was gasping like a fish on dry land. Go, Reeves said, his expression grave. I'll gather what else you might need and follow. Clara hesitated only briefly before nodding and hurrying after the widow. Despite everything she'd just learned about Reeves, the immediate crisis demanded her full attention. Billy's life hung in the balance, and debates about stolen money and outlaws would have to wait. They rushed down the dusty street, the noon sun beating down mercilessly. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Had she missed something in her earlier diagnosis? Perhaps the infection had spread to Billy's bloodstream, or fluid was building in his lungs faster than she'd anticipated. Inside the Barnes cabin, the air was stifling. Billy lay thrashing weakly on his small bed, his lips tinged an alarming shade of blue. Each breath was a desperate, shallow gasp that barely lifted his chest. Clara knelt beside him immediately, pressing her ear to his chest. The congestion she'd heard earlier had worsened dramatically, producing a distinctive crackling sound with each labored breath. Pleural effusion, fluid filling the space around his lungs, compressing them from the outside. "I need to drain the fluid," she said, reaching for her bag. "It's pressing on his lungs, making it impossible for him to breathe properly." Widow Barnes paled. "Like you did for old Mr. Jenkins last winter?" Clara nodded grimly. She had performed the procedure once before, inserting a hollow needle between the ribs to drain accumulated fluid. Jenkins had survived, but he'd been a grown man with more resilience than 8-year-old Billy. "I'll need boiling water, all your clean linens in a glass jar," Clara instructed, already rolling up her sleeves, "and whiskey if you have any." As the widow hurried to comply, Clara took Billy's hand. His fingers were cold despite the fever still burning through him, his nails showing the same bluish tinge as his lips. Oxygen deprivation. She had minutes, not hours. "Stay with me, Billy," she murmured, smoothing his sweat-dampened hair. "I know it's hard, but you need to keep fighting." The door opened and Reeves entered, carrying additional supplies from the clinic. Her surgical kit, several vials of tinctures and clean bandages. His gaze immediately assessed the situation, taking in Billy's condition with a practiced eye. "Fluid in the chest?" he asked quietly, setting the supplies beside her. Clara nodded, surprised by his medical knowledge. "Compressing his right lung. I need to drain it immediately." "I've seen it done in field hospitals during the war," Reeves said, rolling up his sleeves. "Tell me how I can help." There was no time for questions about his past or his experience. Clara pointed to the table where Widow Barnes was arranging supplies. "Sterilize my longest hollow needle in the boiling water, then in whiskey. I need to find the right intercostal space." While Reeves prepared the needle, Clara carefully palpated Billy's ribcage, identifying the proper insertion point. The boy's breathing was becoming more labored by the second, his small body fighting desperately for each scrap of air. "Hold him steady," Clara instructed, when Reeves returned with the sterilized needle. "This will hurt him, but he can't move during the insertion." Reeves positioned himself at the head of the bed, his large hands gentle but firm on Billy's shoulders. "You're going to be fine, son," he told the boy, his deep voice somehow reassuring despite the gravity of the situation. "Miss Clara's going to help you breathe easier. Just hold on to me, and it'll be over before you know it." Clara swabbed the insertion site with whiskey, then took a deep breath to steady her hands. She'd assisted Doc Miller with this procedure before, but performing it alone on a child was entirely different. One slip, one mistake, and she could puncture Billy's lung or heart. "I can't," she whispered suddenly, doubt overwhelming her. "If I do this wrong, you won't," Reeves said firmly. "Look at me, Clara." She raised her eyes to meet his steady blue gaze. "This boy will die without your help," he said simply. "You know what to do. Trust yourself." Something in his unwavering confidence steadied her. Clara nodded once, returned her attention to Billy, and with a silent prayer, inserted the needle between his ribs with slow, deliberate precision. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then yellowish fluid began flowing through the needle into the waiting jar. Almost immediately, Billy's breathing eased slightly, the desperate gasping giving way to rapid but deeper breaths. "That's it," Clara murmured, watching the fluid drain. "Keep the jar steady," she instructed Widow Barnes, who had returned to the bedside. The procedure took nearly 20 minutes, during which Reeves never moved from his position, keeping Billy calm with quiet stories about wild horses and distant mountains. By the time Clara removed the needle and bandaged the small wound, the boy's color had improved dramatically, the blue tinge replaced by healthier pink. He'll need to be monitored closely, she told the widow as she packed her supplies. The fluid could build again, though I've left a tincture that should help prevent it. I'll return this evening to check on him. Outside the cabin, the afternoon sun had begun its slow descent toward the western horizon. Clara suddenly remembered Wade's ultimatum. Sundown. How many hours remained? 4, 5 at most. You saved his life, Reeves said, as they walked back toward the clinic. We did, Clara corrected, giving him a sidelong glance. Where did you learn so much about medicine? A shadow crossed his face. 4 years of war teaches a man more about wounds and dying than any medical school. After that, my mother's midwifery knowledge seemed more valuable than ever. They walked in silence for a moment, each lost in thought. The immediate crisis had passed, but a larger one loomed with the setting sun. Wade will return, Clara said finally, with or without the money. Yes. Reeves's voice was grim. And he's not a man who makes idle threats. Then we need to evacuate the town, she decided. Get everyone who can travel to safety before sundown. Reeves nodded. I've been thinking the same. There's a settlement about 15 miles east. They could shelter there temporarily. I'll start spreading the word, Clara said, quickening her pace. Widow Barnes and Billy can travel in Doc Miller's old wagon. The Peterson family has an ox cart that could take the Hendersons and their children. The rest... Clara, Reeves interrupted gently, catching her arm. You should go with them. She stopped, looking up at him in surprise. I can't leave. There are people who can't travel. Mrs. Santiago is due to deliver any day now, and old Mr. Grady can barely walk across his own cabin. Then you're choosing to stay in harm's way, he said, searching her face. I've been in harm's way since the mine collapsed, she replied with unexpected fire. This town has been dying slowly for months. At least Wade offers a quicker end. You don't mean that, don't I? The emotion that had been building within her suddenly spilled over. Do you know what it's like to watch something you love die by inches? To fight every day knowing you're going to lose? To hold on because letting go feels like betrayal, even when holding on is breaking you? Her voice cracked on the final words, and she turned away, embarrassed by the outburst. Reeves was silent for a long moment, giving her time to compose herself. Yes, he said finally, so quietly she almost missed it. I do know. Something in his tone made her look back at him. The hardness she'd glimpsed earlier had softened, revealing a profound weariness that matched her own. Tell me about the money, she said suddenly. The whole truth this time. Reeves sighed, gesturing toward the clinic porch. Let's sit. It's not a short story. As they settled on the rough wooden steps, the sun continued its inexorable descent, counting down the hours until Malcolm Wade would return to claim his blood money, or extract a terrible price in its absence. Reeves gazed out at the empty street, gathering his thoughts before speaking. When he finally began, his voice was low and measured, as if carefully weighing each word. I wasn't born to this life, he said. My father was a circuit judge in Missouri, respected, principled, honest to a fault. My mother, as I mentioned, was a midwife. They raised me to believe in justice, in helping others. Even sent me to university in St. Louis for a time. Clara studied his profile, trying to reconcile this description with the gunslinger who'd appeared at her door. What happened? The war, he said simply. Like many young men, I enlisted believing in a cause. Left university to fight. Discovered rather quickly that war strips away illusions about honor and glory, leaving only survival and the men beside you. He flexed his right hand unconsciously, and Clara noticed a slight stiffness in the movement. I was at Shiloh, he continued, took a Minié ball through my shoulder. While recovering, I received word that my parents' home had been raided by bushwhackers. My father hanged for his Union sympathies, my mother. He paused. She survived. but never recovered from what they did to her. Died 6 months later. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. Reeves acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "After the war, I drifted. The law didn't seem to matter anymore, not after what I'd seen done in the name of justice on both sides. I was angry, rootless, fell in with men who lived outside society's boundaries, found I had a talent for cards, for reading men's intentions, for handling guns." "And Wade?" Clara prompted when he fell silent. "Met him 3 years ago in Dodge City. He was different then, or seemed it, smart, ambitious, with plans beyond simple robbery. He assembled a crew for what he called selected redistribution of railroad wealth. Said the railroads were stealing from honest people through monopolies and rate fixing, and we were simply taking back what they'd stolen." Reeves laughed bitterly. "I wanted to believe it. Needed to believe I wasn't just a common thief. We hit railroad payrolls, bank shipments, always carefully planned, minimal violence, until the Butterfield stage." His expression darkened. "Wade said it was carrying railroad bonds worth thousands. Easy target, minimal risk. What he didn't tell us was that he'd made a deal with Carson, his second-in-command, to eliminate witnesses. I was riding point, so I didn't see it happen. When I returned, 3 passengers were dead. A young woman with a photograph of her baby in her pocket, a schoolteacher with letters from his students, and an old man carrying a watch he was bringing to his grandson." Clara could hear the self-recrimination in his voice. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Reeves said, disgust evident in his tone. "Not immediately. I helped count the money. 50,000 in cash, not bonds. Took my share, rode away, told myself I hadn't pulled the trigger." He met her eyes directly. "I spent 3 days drinking, trying to drown those faces. Then I went to a small church in Laramie, sat in the back pew until everyone left, and asked myself what my father would have done." "And that's when you took the money?" Clara asked. Reeves nodded. "All of it. Waited until the others were passed out from celebration, took every dollar and disappeared. Spent the next month tracking down the families of those killed. The young woman, her name was Catherine Miller, had a 2-year-old son being raised by her sister in St. Joseph. The teacher, William Abernathy, supported his elderly mother in Denver. The old man, Henry Gaines, had 4 grandchildren in Topeka who depended on him." "You gave them the money," Clara said, beginning to understand. 25,000 split between them, Reeves confirmed, anonymously. Enough to secure their futures, though nothing could replace what they'd lost. The remaining 25,000 belonged to Butterfield, and they'd already been reimbursed by their insurance. That money, he hesitated. "That's what Wade wants back," Clara guessed. "Yes, but he's too late." Reeves stood, pacing the small porch. "Most of it is already committed. 15,000 went to establish a school for orphans of the war in Kansas City, children who lost everything like I did. The school opened 3 months ago, named for my mother." Clara felt her preconceptions shifting. "And the rest?" 5,000 is hidden nearby, my emergency fund. The final 5,000. He turned to face her directly. "That's what I meant to offer prosperity." $5,000, Clara breathed, barely able to comprehend such a sum. "Why here? Why us?" Reeves returned to sit beside her, closer now. "When I was growing up, my mother often spoke of her dream to establish a proper birthing hospital, a place where women could deliver their babies safely, where midwives and doctors could work together, sharing knowledge. After the stage robbery, after facing what I'd become, I started looking for a place to fulfill that dream in her memory." His eyes met hers, intense and earnest. "Then I took a bullet and stumbled into a dying town with a skilled midwife mourning the loss of a mother and child. It felt like providence." Clara's mind raced, trying to process everything he'd revealed. "You want to build a birthing hospital in prosperity?" "Not just that," Reeves said, his voice gaining momentum. A medical center for the entire territory. Think about it. The new road will bring travelers. The natural crossroads position makes it accessible from multiple directions. With proper facilities and trained personnel, Prosperity could become known throughout the West as a place of healing. Despite herself, Clara felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. It would take more than money. It would need doctors, supplies, support. All obtainable, with the right backing, Reeves insisted. I have connections in St. Louis, medical suppliers, physicians looking for opportunities. The 5,000 would be just the beginning, enough to renovate buildings, purchase initial equipment, provide stipends for the first doctors while the practice establishes itself. And the town's existing residents would have opportunities they never imagined, he said. Supporting businesses would flourish. Boarding houses, restaurants, livery stables. Children like Billy Barnes would have futures beyond dying minds. The vision he painted was seductive in its possibility. For the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to imagine prosperity, not just surviving, but thriving, becoming something new and vital. It sounds too good to be true, she said carefully. And there's still the matter of Wade. He wants his money, and even if it's gone, he'll want revenge. Reeves's expression sobered. Yes, Wade is a problem that needs solving before anything else can happen. Could you give him the 5,000 you have hidden? Clara suggested. Perhaps it would be enough to satisfy him. Reeves shook his head. You don't know Malcolm Wade. 5,000 would just convince him the rest is somewhere nearby. He'd tear Prosperity apart looking for it, then kill everyone who remained as a message to others who might cross him. Then what options do we have? Clara asked, frustration edging her voice. We can evacuate those who can travel, but that still leaves the most vulnerable behind. And even if everyone survives today, Wade will return. Men like him always do. Reeves was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. There is one possibility, he said finally, but it's dangerous, and it would require perfect timing and a certain amount of luck. What is it? Wade wants me more than the money, Reeves explained. His reputation depends on not letting betrayal go unpunished. If I could draw him away from town, lead him to believe I've hidden the money elsewhere, the people here might be safe. Clara frowned. That's not a solution. That's a suicide mission. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but it would give Prosperity time. Time for you to implement the vision we've discussed, with or without me. And if you die, who would? Clara began, but fell silent as the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. They both rose, scanning the horizon. A cloud of dust approached from the east, too large for Wade and his two companions. How many people did you say still live in Prosperity? Reeves asked quietly. About 30, Clara replied, her heart beginning to race. Why? Because unless I'm mistaken, Wade has returned early, Reeves said grimly. And he's brought reinforcements. The dust cloud grew larger as at least a dozen riders approached Prosperity's main street. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she calculated what this meant. Wade had not only returned early but had multiplied his force. Any chance of peaceful resolution had vanished. Get inside, Reeves said, his voice tight with urgency. Lock the door and stay away from the windows. Clara shook her head. We don't have time for this argument again. These are my people, my town. And those are professional killers, Reeves countered, already checking his revolvers. Men who won't hesitate to use you against me. Then tell me how I can help, she insisted, meeting his gaze with determination, because I'm not hiding while Prosperity burns. Something in her expression must have convinced him of her resolve, because after a moment's hesitation, Reeves nodded sharply. We need to warn everyone still in town, Get them gathered in one defensible location or hidden where Wade's men won't find them easily. The church, Clara decided immediately. It's the sturdiest building left, and the cellar is spacious enough for everyone. Pastor Williams kept it stocked with supplies in case of blizzards. Good. How quickly can you spread the word? Give me 15 minutes, she said, already moving toward the door. What will you do? Reeves checked the ammunition in his belt. Buy us time. Wade will expect me to run or hide. I'll do neither. Fear clutched at Clara's chest. You can't face them alone. I don't intend to fight them. Not yet, he replied. Just distract them while you get everyone to safety. The approaching riders were close enough now that Clara could make out individual figures. Wade at the front, flanked by his original companions, and followed by at least 10 more rough-looking men, all heavily armed. 15 minutes, Reeves repeated. Then get yourself to the church with the others. Before she could respond, he strode into the street, positioning himself directly in the oncoming rider's path. Clara didn't wait to see more. She slipped out the back of the clinic and raced toward the nearest occupied house, pushing her body to move faster than it ever had before. House to house she ran, delivering the same urgent message. Wade has returned with armed men. Take only what you can carry and get to the church cellar immediately. Stay quiet and hidden. The responses varied from stunned silence to terrified questions, but everyone moved with the urgency the situation demanded. Parents gathered children, the elderly grabbed medicines, and all made their way toward the small white church at the town's southern edge. As Clara helped Mrs. Santiago waddle toward safety, her advanced pregnancy making quick movement impossible, she heard voices raised in the distance, Reeves and Wade, though she couldn't make out the words. No gunshots yet. Reeves was somehow keeping them talking. Old Mr. Grady insisted on bringing his ancient shotgun, despite arthritic hands that could barely hold it. Lived through the Mexican War and the war between the states, he wheezed as Clara helped him along. Not dying without a fight now. By the time Clara delivered her final warning to the Henderson family and ensured they were headed to the church, almost 20 minutes had passed. Her promised 15 minutes to Reeves had expired, but she couldn't bring herself to leave without checking on him. Creeping along the backs of buildings, Clara made her way to a position where she could see the main street without being spotted. What she saw made her blood run cold. Reeves stood alone in the middle of the street, facing Wade and his men, who had dismounted and spread out in a loose semicircle. His posture was deceptively casual, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. Last chance, James, Wade was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. Tell me where my money is and I'll consider letting you choose how you die. Generous offer, Reeves replied, his tone almost conversational. But as I've been explaining for the past quarter hour, the money's gone, spent, distributed, nothing left to find. Wade's laugh was cold and brittle. You expect me to believe you gave away $50,000? You, of all people? Believe what you want, Malcolm. It changes nothing. Wade gestured to his men, who began spreading out further, moving toward the buildings that lined the street. Search everything, he ordered. Every building, every cellar, every well. If there's a loose floorboard or a suspicious patch of dirt, I want to know about it. Clara's heart sank. It wouldn't take long for Wade's men to discover the townspeople gathered in the church. She had to do something, create a distraction, lead them away somehow. Before she could move, Reeves spoke again, his voice hardening. The town's empty, Malcolm. I sent everyone away when I realized you were coming. It's just you and me now. Wade studied him skeptically. How convenient. And I suppose they took nothing with them, left all their belongings behind for us to search through. They took what mattered, Reeves said. The rest is just things. Search anyway, Wade told his men, who continued their advance toward the buildings. And if you find anyone still here, bring them to me, alive. Clara pressed herself against the wall of the mercantile, her mind racing. Reeves was trying to protect the townspeople by claiming they'd fled, but Wade wasn't buying it. She needed to reach the church before Wade's men did, to prepare the people hiding there for what might come. As she turned to slip away, her foot knocked against an empty tin can discarded near the building's edge. The clatter seemed deafening in the tense silence. "What was that?" one of Wade's men called, turning toward the sound. "Check it out," Wade ordered, gesturing toward the mercantile. Clara froze, trapped. If she ran, they'd surely see her. If she stayed, they'd find her in moments. Either way, she'd become Wade's leverage against Reeves. "Hold on," Reeves called, his voice commanding attention. "Before your men waste time searching an empty town, you should know something about that money, Malcolm." Wade held up his hand, stopping his men momentarily. "I'm listening." 5,000 is hidden nearby, Reeves said, the admission clearly calculated to focus Wade's attention back on him. "Not in town. About 2 miles north at the abandoned Simmons homestead, under the floorboards of the root cellar." Clara recognized the tactic immediately. Reeves was trying to draw Wade and his men away from prosperity, away from the hidden townspeople. But why reveal the location of the money he actually did have? Unless... Wade's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And the rest?" "Like I said, it's gone," Reeves replied. "But 5,000 is better than nothing, isn't it? Or would you rather waste more time searching empty buildings?" Wade considered this, clearly weighing his options. "Parker, Wilson, take 4 men and check out this homestead. If the money's there, bring it back. If not..." He fixed Reeves with a cold stare. "Well, we'll have a different kind of conversation then." 6 of Wade's men mounted up and rode north, following Reeves's directions. That still left Wade and 5 others. Bad odds, but better than before. "The rest of you keep searching," Wade instructed the remaining men. "I don't trust our friend here any more than I'd trust a rattlesnake." As Wade's men resumed their advance toward the buildings, including the mercantile where Clara hid, a single gunshot echoed from the direction of the church. Everyone froze, heads turning toward the sound. "Empty town, is it?" Wade said with a dangerous smile. "Sounds like your friends didn't get very far, James." Clara's heart sank. Old Mr. Grady with his shotgun? One of the Henderson boys with the pistol their father had left behind. Someone had panicked or tried to defend themselves, and now everyone's hiding place was compromised. Reeves' expression didn't change, but Clara could see the calculation in his eyes as he adjusted to this new development. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of resignation. "Let them go, Malcolm," he said quietly. "They're not part of this." "They became part of it when you brought my money to their town," Wade replied, gesturing for 3 of his men to investigate the gunshot. "But perhaps we can make a trade. Their lives for the rest of my money." "I told you." Yes, it's gone," Wade interrupted impatiently. "Except for the 5,000 you so conveniently remembered. I wonder what else you might remember when we start shooting civilians." As Wade's men moved toward the church, Clara made her decision. She couldn't reach the townspeople before Wade's men did, but she could create a diversion that might give Reeves a better chance to act. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from her hiding place. "That won't be necessary," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm the only one left in town. Everyone else left days ago." All eyes turned to Clara as she stood exposed in the dying afternoon light. Wade's men instinctively reached for their weapons, but Wade himself raised a hand to stay them, his expression curious rather than alarmed. Well, he said, studying her with cold interest. "If it isn't the local doctor, or midwife, I believe James called you." Reeves's face had gone rigid, his eyes conveying a mixture of anger and fear that Clara had never seen there before. "Clara, get back inside," he ordered, though he must have known it was too late. "Clara, is it?" Wade echoed, clearly savoring this new development. Pretty name for a pretty lady, and brave too by the looks of it. Clara kept her chin high as she walked forward, placing herself midway between Wade and Reeves. She could feel the weight of both men's gazes, though she focused solely on Wade. "I'm Clara Evanson, the midwife for what's left of Prosperity. And as I said, there's no one else here. Just me." "What about that gunshot we heard?" Wade challenged, gesturing toward the church. "Mr. Grady's old shotgun," she replied without hesitation. "It was his prized possession. I fired it into the air before I left him at the crossroads with the others, a farewell to the home he'll never see again." It was a gamble. Wade could easily send men to verify her claim, but Clara was counting on his focus remaining on Reeves and the money. "How touching," Wade said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. "And yet you stayed behind. Why is that, Miss Evanson? Perhaps to help your friend here hide my money?" "I stayed because this is my home," Clara replied firmly, "and because someone needed to tell you that destroying this town won't get you what you want." Wade chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "I appreciate your candor, but I'll decide what will or won't get me what I want." He turned his attention back to Reeves. "You've found yourself quite the advocate, James. First you steal my money, and now you've charmed the local midwife into risking her life for you. I'm almost impressed." "She has nothing to do with this," Reeves said, his voice dangerously low. "Let her go, and I'll come with you willingly. You can extract whatever revenge you want away from here." Wade pretended to consider the offer. Tempting, but incomplete. "I want my money, James. All $50,000. "I told you where to find what's left," Reeves insisted. "The rest is gone." Before Wade could respond, one of his men came running from the direction of the church. "Boss, you need to see this." Wade frowned at the interruption. "See what, Jenkins?" "The church," Jenkins replied, breathing hard. "It's... just come see." Clara's heart sank. Had they discovered the hidden townspeople? Was the cellar entrance too obvious? She fought to keep her expression neutral as Wade gestured for two of his men to keep their guns trained on Reeves. "Watch him," Wade instructed. "If he moves, shoot him in the legs. I want him alive for now." He turned to Clara with a cold smile. "You'll come with me, Miss Evanson. I'm curious to see if your story about an empty town holds up." With no choice but to comply, Clara walked alongside Wade toward the church, acutely aware of Reeves being held at gunpoint behind them. Whatever was waiting at the church, she needed to be ready to act, to protect her people somehow. As they rounded the corner and the white clapboard building came into view, Clara stopped short in amazement. The church doors stood wide open, and dozens of armed men in territorial marshal uniforms surrounded the building, weapons drawn. "What the hell?" Wade muttered, instinctively reaching for his gun. "I wouldn't," came a commanding voice from the church steps. A tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped forward. "Malcolm Wade, you and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons." Wade's face contorted with rage as he turned to Clara. "You knew about this?" "No," she answered truthfully, as confused as he was. "I had no idea." Behind them came shouts and the distinctive sound of revolvers being cocked. Clara turned to see more marshals emerging from between buildings, training their weapons on the men guarding Reeves. "Last chance, Wade," the marshal on the church steps called. "Surrender now or we open fire." For a tense moment, Wade seemed to be calculating his odds. Then, with a snarl of frustration, he slowly raised his hands. "This isn't over," he hissed at Clara before calling to his men. "Stand down, boys. We're outnumbered." The next few minutes passed in a blur as Wade and his men were disarmed and restrained. Clara rushed back to where Reeves stood, now freed from his captors but looking as confused as she felt. "Did you arrange this?" she asked, searching his face for answers. Before he could respond, the marshal who had spoken from the church steps approached them, removing his hat respectfully as he addressed Clara. "Miss Evenson, I'm Marshal Daniel Grant. I apologize for the deception, but we needed to be certain of our target." "Deception?" Clara repeated, looking between the marshal and Reeves. "What deception?" Reeves looked as mystified as she felt. "I had nothing to do with this, Clara." Marshal Grant nodded. "Mr. Reeves is telling the truth. He wasn't part of our operation." He turned to Reeves with grudging respect, though your arrival in Prosperity certainly complicated things. "You were already here," Reeves realized, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The abandoned town was never as abandoned as it appeared," Grant confirmed. "We've had men positioned here for nearly a month, waiting for Wade. When he was spotted in the territory 2 days ago, we mobilized the rest of our force." "The townspeople," Clara asked urgently, "in the church cellar, are perfectly safe," Grant assured her. "We evacuated them through the back entrance as soon as we confirmed Wade's approach. They're being escorted to safety as we speak." Relief washed over Clara. "And the gunshot?" "One of my men," Grant admitted with a grimace. "Accidental discharge. Nearly compromised the entire operation." Clara's mind raced to process everything. "So Prosperity was, what, bait?" Grant had the decency to look somewhat abashed. "A strategic location, Miss Evenson. Wade has been raiding throughout the territory for months. We needed to draw him somewhere we could control the situation." "And you used these people as pawns," Reeves said, anger evident in his voice. "Did it occur to you that innocent lives were at risk?" "We had the situation under control," Grant insisted, though he couldn't quite meet their eyes. "Wade has killed dozens in his spree. The territorial governor authorized whatever means necessary to bring him to justice." Clara felt her earlier relief giving way to indignation. "So while we've been struggling to keep this town alive, you've been using our vulnerability to set a trap?" "Politics," Reeves muttered disgustedly. "I should have known." Grant straightened, his expression hardening. "What you should know, Mr. Reeves, is that you're still wanted for questioning regarding the Butterfield stage robbery. The only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is that we have witnesses placing you elsewhere during the actual killings." Reeves's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know I wasn't involved in the murders?" "We've been building a case against Wade for months," Grant explained. "Several witnesses have come forward, including a former member of Wade's gang who turned state's evidence. He confirmed that you left before the passengers were killed, though you did take your share of the money afterward." Clara glanced at Reeves, who didn't deny this part of the accusation. "Speaking of which," Grant continued, "there's still the matter of the stolen funds. The Butterfield Company is quite interested in recovering their $25,000. "That money is gone," Reeves said flatly. "Returned to those who deserved it most." Marshal Grant studied him for a long moment. "So I've heard. Anonymous donations to the families of the victims. Very noble." His tone suggested he found such nobility suspicious. "And the company's portion?" "Invested," Reeves replied without elaboration. The marshal sighed. "We'll need to discuss that further. For now, I'm placing you under protective custody until we sort everything out." He turned to Clara. "Miss Evenson, you're free to join your townspeople. They're being temporarily housed in Riverton until the situation here is resolved." "Resolved?" Clara echoed. "What does that mean for Prosperity?" Grant looked uncomfortable. "That's not for me to decide. But with the mine closed and the population dwindled, I understand the territorial government is considering revoking the town charter." "They can't do that," Clara protested. "People still live here. We have rights to this land." "I sympathize," Grant said, though his tone suggested limited patience for her concerns while he was in the middle of a major arrest. "But those are discussions for another day." Right now, I need to secure these prisoners for transport." As Grant turned to oversee Wade's processing, Clara found herself facing Reeves, who was being approached by two deputies. "This isn't how I imagined our conversations ending," he said quietly. "It's not ending," Clara replied with sudden determination. "Whatever happens next, we're not finished, James Reeves." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Is that a promise, Miss Evanson?" "It is," she said firmly, even as the deputies flanked him. "And unlike some, I keep my promises." As Reeves was led away, Clara stood in the middle of the street, watching the sun begin its final descent toward the horizon. Prosperity, the town she had fought so hard to save, now sat eerily empty, its fate hanging in the balance. But for the first time in months, something besides grief and resignation burned in her chest. Possibility, hope, and a determination that had been reawakened by a wounded gunslinger who had stumbled into her life less than 24 hours ago. Whatever came next, Clara knew with absolute certainty that this story was far from over. 3 weeks passed before Clara was allowed to return to Prosperity. 3 weeks of uncomfortable lodging in Riverton, where the townspeople were treated more like refugees than citizens with rights to their own homes. 3 weeks of bureaucratic obstacles and patronizing officials who spoke about relocating the survivors and the unfortunate necessity of abandonment, as if Prosperity had already ceased to exist. Throughout it all, Clara fought. She fought with carefully worded letters to territorial officials. She fought in tense meetings with government representatives who seemed determined to erase Prosperity from the map. She fought against the growing resignation among her own people, who had begun to believe that returning was a lost cause. "Miss Evanson," Territorial Commissioner Hargrave said during their third meeting, not bothering to hide his impatience, "you must face reality. Prosperity was built on silver. The silver is gone. The company has surrendered its claims. Without economic foundation, the town cannot survive." "People are the foundation of any town, Commissioner," Clara countered, refusing to be intimidated by his imposing office in the territorial capital. "And the people of Prosperity have the right to determine their own future." "Admirable sentiment," Hargrave replied, shuffling papers dismissively. "But sentiment doesn't build infrastructure or create jobs. The territorial government cannot justify maintaining services for a ghost town." "Then give us the chance to create something new," Clara insisted. "Prosperity's location has value beyond mining. The new territorial road will pass 5 miles south," Hargrave interrupted. "Not close enough to sustain commerce without significant additional investment, which the territory cannot provide." Clara had left that meeting like all the others, frustrated but unbowed. Each night she returned to the cramped boarding house room she shared with Widow Barnes and her recovering son, drafting new arguments, new proposals, new visions for what Prosperity could become. And each day she requested permission to visit James Reeves, held in the Riverton jail while authorities determined his fate. Each day, her request was denied. Until finally, on the 22nd day, Marshal Grant himself appeared at the boarding house door. "Miss Evanson," he said, removing his hat, "if you're still interested, you may visit the prisoner this afternoon. 1 hour, supervised." Clara didn't ask what had changed or why the sudden allowance. She simply gathered her shawl and followed Grant through Riverton's dusty streets to the solid brick jailhouse at the town center. Reeves was housed in a separate cell from Wade's men, a small concession to his complicated status as both criminal and key witness. When Clara entered the narrow room, he rose immediately from his cot, surprise and something warmer lighting his eyes. 10 minutes alone," Marshal Grant said unexpectedly. "I'll be right outside." The door closed with a heavy clank, leaving them in a silence broken only by the distant sounds of the town beyond the thick walls. "You look well," Clara said finally, taking in his appearance. He was clean-shaven, his clothes plain but neat. The wound in his side had clearly healed, though he moved with a slight stiffness when he approached the bars. "Better than expected for a man facing prison," he replied with a ghost of his former smile. "You, on the other hand, look exhausted." Clara brushed aside his concern. "I've been busy. Fighting bureaucrats is more tiring than delivering babies." "So I've heard." At her questioning look, he added, "Marshal Grant keeps me informed, perhaps hoping I'll be grateful enough to reveal where the rest of the money is hidden." "And will you?" Reeves's expression grew serious. "That depends on what happens to Prosperity, and to you." Clara moved closer to the bars. "They want to revoke the town charter, relocate everyone, pretend Prosperity never existed. And what do you want?" "You know what I want," she said softly. "The same thing you suggested, a new beginning, a purpose beyond mining, a future." Reeves nodded, studying her face. "The medical center, the birthing hospital." "It could work," Clara insisted, her voice gaining intensity. "Everything you said about Prosperity's location, its potential, it's all true. But without funds to begin, without support." She trailed off, frustration evident in her expression. "The territorial government won't help?" Commissioner Hargrave made that abundantly clear, and the townspeople have barely enough to survive, let alone invest in a new vision. Reeves was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. What if the $5,000 suddenly became available? Clara's breath caught. "Your emergency fund?" "But the marshals have been searching for it." "They've been searching the Simmons homestead," he corrected with a slight smile. "Where I told Wade it was hidden." Understanding dawned on Clara's face. "It's not there." "Of course not. I've never even been to the Simmons homestead. I made up that location on the spot." Hope flared briefly in Clara's chest, then dimmed. "But even if we had the money, the territorial government can be persuaded with the right incentives," Reeves interrupted. "Politicians respond to two things, Clara: money and public opinion. $5,000 won't sway them, but something else might." "What?" Reeves glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "Wade's capture made headlines across the territory. The marshals are claiming it as a great victory for law and order, but they're also facing questions about using Prosperity as bait without properly protecting its citizens." Clara frowned. "How do you know this?" "I listen," he said simply. "Guards talk. Marshals visit. Newspapers are passed around. The territorial governor is facing criticism for endangering civilians. So leverage that," Reeves urged. "Make Prosperity's revival a matter of making amends. The government used your town for their purposes. Now they owe you restoration." Clara's mind raced with possibilities. They'd need a compelling reason to invest in Prosperity rather than simply paying reparations to individuals. "Give them one," Reeves said, his blue eyes intense. "Your medical center isn't just about saving Prosperity. It's about serving the entire territory. A place where women can safely deliver their children, where travelers can receive care, where medical knowledge can be advanced on the frontier." "A territorial asset," Clara murmured, the concept taking shape in her mind. "Exactly. Frame it as the government turning a mistake into a legacy. Politicians love legacies, Clara. Things they can point to and claim credit for long after they're gone." For the first time in weeks, Clara felt genuine hope stirring. It could work, but we'd still need the initial investment to prove the concept is viable. "The $5,000, Reeves confirmed. "It's yours if you want it." "Where is it?" He hesitated, then made a decision. "Under the floorboards in the clinic, not the examination room, the storage closet." Third board from the east wall. Clara stared at him in amazement. It was there the whole time, while Wade and his men searched the town? A smile touched his lips. Sometimes the best hiding place is the most obvious one. No one looks for valuables in a dying town's medical clinic. Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Marshal Grant returned. "Time's up, Miss Evenson." "One moment more, please," she asked, her eyes never leaving Reeves. Grant hesitated, then nodded curtly. "1 minute, no more." When they were alone again, Clara pressed closer to the bars. "What happens to you now?" "Trial next month," Reeves replied. "For my part in the stage robbery and the theft of the money, Wade and Carson will hang for the murders, but my fate is less certain." "You could tell them about the money you gave to the victims' families," Clara suggested. "Surely that would count in your favor." "Perhaps, but that still leaves the question of the company's portion." Clara understood his dilemma. If he revealed that he'd used the stolen money to fund the orphan school and potentially Prosperity's revival, he'd be admitting to crimes that could send him to prison for years. "There must be a way," she insisted, "some legal maneuver." "Clara," he interrupted gently, "focus on saving Prosperity first. My fate is in the hands of the law now." "I won't abandon you," she said fiercely, "not after everything." Something softened in his expression. "I believe you, but promise me one thing." "What?" "If you find that money in the clinic," he said carefully, "use it for the medical center, regardless of what happens to me. Give my mother's dream life, even if I can't be there to see it." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "Is that your promise, James Reeves? The one I'm supposed to keep?" "No," he replied, his voice dropping to a whisper as Grant cleared his throat impatiently from the doorway. "My promise is this: whatever happens, however this ends, I will find a way back to you and to Prosperity. That's my word, Clara Evenson." As Grant led her from the jailhouse, Clara's mind was already racing with plans. She would return to Prosperity immediately, with or without official permission. She would find the hidden money, and she would use every resource at her disposal to save her town and the man who had given her the means to do it. What Clara couldn't possibly know then was that the promise Reeves had made, and the one she was about to make in return, would indeed change the course of history in ways neither of them could imagine. Clara returned to Prosperity alone, ignoring the territorial marshal's warnings about unauthorized re-entry and restricted access to what they now called a secured location. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same officials who had used her town as bait were now trying to keep her from returning to it. The streets were eerily silent as she made her way to the clinic, dust swirling in her wake. Without people to hold it together, Prosperity was already beginning to surrender to the elements. Shutters creaked on loose hinges, tumbleweeds gathered against doorsteps, and the persistent prairie wind whispered through empty buildings like a mournful ghost. Inside the clinic, everything remained exactly as she had left it that fateful day when Wade and his men arrived. Her medical bag still sat open on the examination table, supplies scattered from her hasty departure to warn the townspeople. Reeves's blood-stained bandages lay discarded by the wash basin. Without hesitation, Clara moved to the storage closet, counting floorboards from the eastern wall. The third board lifted easily, revealing a small metal strongbox. Inside lay $5,000 in crisp banknotes, more money than Clara had ever seen in one place. Enough to begin. Over the next 2 months, Clara waged a campaign unlike anything the territorial government had ever faced. She wrote impassioned editorials to every newspaper in the territory, detailing how Prosperity's citizens had been used as unwitting bait in a dangerous sting operation. She collected testimonials from townspeople, emphasizing the hardships they'd endured after being displaced from their homes. Most powerfully, she shared Billy Barnes's story, how a child fighting for his life had been endangered by the government's reckless disregard for civilian safety. Public opinion shifted rapidly. The territorial governor, facing mounting criticism in an upcoming election, found himself in an increasingly untenable position. When Clara presented her proposal for transforming Prosperity into a frontier medical center, complete with architectural drawings, budgets, and endorsements from physicians in St. Louis, the political calculus became clear. A territorial investment in frontier medicine, Commissioner Hargrave announced at a hastily arranged public ceremony in Riverton. The governor is proud to announce a matching grant of $5,000 to establish the Western Territory's first specialized medical facility in Prosperity. Clara stood on the platform beside him, her expression revealing none of the bitter amusement she felt at this political theater. They were presenting as generosity what had been extracted through pressure and shame. But she had won. Prosperity would live again, with a new purpose and a new future. As summer turned to autumn, the town slowly came back to life. Families returned to reclaim their homes. Carpenters began renovations on the old mercantile building, transforming it into what would become the main hospital facility. 2 young doctors from St. Louis arrived, attracted by Clara's promise of a medical practice unlike any other on the frontier. Through it all, Clara visited Reeves weekly in the Riverton jail, keeping him informed of every development as he awaited his trial. His legal situation had improved somewhat. Testimonies from Wade's former associates confirmed that Reeves had not participated in the murders, but the theft charges remained. "They're offering a deal," he told Clara during her visit in late October. 5 years instead of 20 if I reveal what happened to all the money and return what remains." 5 years, Clara repeated, the words settling like stones in her stomach. "That's still so long." "It's fair," Reeves said with quiet resignation. "I did take that money, Clara. Whatever my intentions, the law is clear. And if you accept this deal, what happens to Prosperity? To the school for orphans you established? Will they seize those assets too?" Reeves shook his head. "That's the interesting part. The Butterfield Company is willing to consider the funds used for the orphan school and Prosperity's medical center as reparations of a sort, particularly since the story has gained such public attention. They're concerned about appearing heartless toward orphans and frontier healthcare. So they'd rather look magnanimous than vindictive," Clara observed with a wry smile. "Exactly. Corporate benevolence plays better in the press than ruthless prosecution." Hope sparked in Clara's chest. "Then you'll only serve 5 years. Perhaps less, with good behavior," Reeves said, reaching through the bars to take her hand. "And when I'm released, there will be a place waiting for me." The question carried more meaning than its simple words suggested. Clara's fingers tightened around his. Always. The trial came in November, brief and procedural rather than dramatic. James Reeves pleaded guilty to theft of the Butterfield Company's portion of the stage robbery proceeds, with mitigating circumstances noted regarding his return of the victim's money and the humanitarian uses of the remaining funds. The judge sentenced him to 4 years at the territorial prison, with possibility of parole after 2. On the day they took him away, Clara stood on the Riverton Depot platform, a single figure amid the bustle of the small town's morning activities. "I'll keep my promise," Reeves told her quietly, his wrists shackled but his head held high. "I will find my way back to you." "And I'll keep mine," Clara replied, pressing something into his hand, her mother's small silver locket, containing a tiny daguerreotype of the clinic, now emblazoned with a new sign: Prosperity Medical Center and Evenson Birthing Hospital. 2 years passed with aching slowness and incredible speed. The medical center flourished beyond anyone's expectations, drawing patients from hundreds of miles around. Prosperity's population tripled, then quadrupled, as families settled in a town that offered something precious on the frontier: reliable health care. When the territorial legislature convened in the spring of 1871, they passed what became known as the Prosperity Act, legislation establishing similar medical outposts throughout the Western Territories, creating a network of frontier health care that would save countless lives in the decades to come. Clara was invited to Washington to advise on the national implementation of the program, her methods and organizational approach becoming the template for rural medical services across the expanding nation. Historians would later identify the Prosperity Medical Center as the birthplace of organized frontier medicine in America. And then, on a warm June morning in 1872, Clara stood on the clinic's porch, watching a lone rider approach from the east. She had received the telegram 3 days earlier. Parole granted, coming home. But seeing him in the flesh made her heart race as if it were the first time. James Reeves dismounted slowly, his face leaner than she remembered, new silver threading through his dark hair. He stood before her, hat in hand, the years of separation hanging between them like an almost tangible thing. "The town looks different," he said finally, glancing at the bustling street behind her. The new buildings, the sign announcing the Prosperity Medical College under construction at the north end of town. "Many things are different," Clara agreed, descending the steps, "but not everything." They regarded each other for a long moment, relearning faces that had haunted their dreams for 2 years. Then Clara did something she had imagined countless times during their separation. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, directly over his heart. "Does it still pain you?" she asked softly. "The wound?" "Not anymore," he replied, covering her hand with his own. "Some wounds heal stronger than before." Clara smiled, blinking back tears as she looked up at him. "Do you remember the first time we met? You found me crying on this very porch." "I remember everything about that day," Reeves said, his voice rough with emotion, "including the promise I made myself when I saw you, that if I survived, I would find a way to dry those tears." "You did more than that," Clara whispered, gesturing toward the thriving town around them, the legacy they had built together through an unlikely partnership born of desperation and hope. "You kept your promise. You made history." "We made history," he corrected, drawing her into his arms at last. "And we're just beginning." From the clinic window, young Dr. Peterson watched the reunion with a curious smile, unaware he was witnessing the final chapter of a story that would be told and retold across the American frontier for generations to come. The legend of how a wounded gunslinger and a crying midwife had transformed a dying town into the cornerstone of American frontier medicine, changing the face of healthcare in the West forever.